Today we're going to build a marble and walnut table that cost us $3,500 in materials, but that we sold for $8,000. The client for this project is an executive at a film studio in Los Angeles. He was moving into a new office and he wanted a conference table with a travertine marble top. He ended up picking this silver travertine slab, but I was really trying to push him in what I thought would be a slightly more interesting direction, like an onyx or a marble whitewood top. But he wanted travertine, so I paid $1,350 for a 3/4 inch thick slab and sent it over to a fabricator to have it cut and polished with a double bull-nosed edge. For the base, I'm using 1 3/4 inch thick walnut. I spent just under $900 on the wood, and since this project had a tight turnaround of 3 weeks, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to comparison shop. This was a little bit frustrating because the walnut I got looks great, but I paid for boards that had quite a few defects in them and that weren't perfectly straight on all 4 sides. I started by removing the flawed end pieces and then cutting the 2 long stretchers that go right underneath the tabletop. I'm making these cuts using my Ryobi Circular Saw and the Kreg Jig portable crosscut. This is an affordable combination that's priced for DIYing, but lets me make accurate square cuts, good enough to let this stretcher stand on its own. The base consists of 2 solid panels that serve as legs with 3 stretchers in between. I'm going to make the panels out of these 7.5 to 8 inch wide boards, and as I cut the pieces I check both sides so I can start to lay out the pieces for the panels with the nicest sides facing out. I give this Kreg portable crosscut my highest possible recommendation. It doesn't slide the way a speed square does, and it's lightweight, low cost, and easily portable, but accurate enough that I can trust it with expensive materials like solid walnut. Now that the pieces are cut to length, I trimmed the long edges on my SawStop table saw. I could have done this with the circular saw and a clamp down guide, but I wanted width consistency with the pieces, so the table saw is the way to go. I laid out the pieces for the panels and then marked locations for biscuit joints. Now a biscuit joiner isn't as nice as say a Festool domino, but the domino is about 10 times more expensive and biscuit joints will get the job done here. I applied glue to the edges and clamped the pieces together. Typically I would use the Maker brand T-bar clamps for this, but Mike from Modern Builds took all of mine for his big 2x4 bed project, so some typical woodworking clamps. My rip cuts were pretty square, so I wasn't too worried about buckling, but just to be on the safe side, I clamped down some 2x6 coal boards to keep the panel nice and flat. The weight of the table is resting on these 2 panels, so I want to make sure I had really straight cuts. This is why I cut the pieces of the panels a little bit long and then use my Kreg straight edge guide to trim them perfect. I cut notches for the half lap joints in both the panels and in the upper stretchers. I'm using my Ryobi Jig Saw for this, but when you're cutting material this thick, you want to be a little bit careful because the blade on a jigsaw can bend a little bit. What I like to do in these circumstances is cut inside the lines at first, and I do this from both sides. When you flip the piece over and redraw the lines from the same reference points, you'll see how the blade can tend to drift. But this isn't a big deal because I was going inside the lines. Now all I have to do is use a file or a chisel to remove the last bit of material to get a nice clean fit. I lined the stretchers up next to each other so that when I cut the notches, I could double check to make sure everything was even. I handed the panels over to Jessie, who sanded them down with an orbital sander, starting with 150 grit and working her way up to 220. I used my circular saw to cut the tapers on the ends of the upper stretchers, and we were ready for a test fit. The pieces fit together nicely, and I was ready to take a field measurement so that I could cut the lower stretcher. This was the most beat up piece of walnut, and even though it started at 8 inches wide, we had to trim it on both sides, so it ended up just being about 6 3/4 wide. We're going to use pocket holes on the underside of the stretcher since they'll be hidden from sight. And once again, Kreg came through with a handy low-priced jig that made this nice and easy. Now we only have an hour-and-a-half window to deliver and assemble the table base and the top in the office. So we labeled the pieces in locations that will be hidden from view. The tabletop is going to weigh almost 400 pounds, so I need quite a bit of structural reinforcement. I cut some pieces of 2x4s so that I could make a frame that fits inside of the walnut. Definitely won't show from the outside. I screwed the pieces together using 3-inch long screws and then labeled the frame so once again I would know exactly which direction it's supposed to face in. I did my best to cut around the flaws in the walnut, but there was one little blemish on the inside of one of the panels. And so I just filled this in with wood putty and sanded it flush. I used microfiber rags to remove all the dust off the panels and then hit them with a real heavy coat of Maker brand Simple Finish. I used a clean brand new rag to apply a really thick coat of this oil and wax wood finish. And wow, the color is really coming out. We created Simple Finish to be a high-end finish that's easy to apply. All you do is add a thick coat, wait 10 minutes, add a little bit more to the dry spots, wait another 10 minutes, and then use a clean new rag to rub off the excess. Sergey, my stone fabricator, warned me that travertine is a notoriously weak stone, and that I would need a piece of 5/8 inch thick plywood underneath it to support it. Now this plywood won't be visible because the double bullnose edge on the stone will cover it up. So I cut a piece that would fit inside the cavity underneath the stone tabletop and then screwed on some scrap pieces of MDF so that it would have nice, easy, positive stop guides so that when I'm assembling this in the field, I can line it up nice and quick and then drive in the screws. All right, the pieces are done. Time to pack them into the truck and deliver it. We got to the office about 20 minutes before Sergey did, which gave us plenty of time to assemble the base. We screwed the 2x4 frame to the walnut from the inside out. This way, no screw heads are showing. I drew pencil lines to show me exactly where to drive the screws through the plywood, and the positive stops did the trick, and we're able to line this up and screw it down nice and quick. We placed the lower stretcher and then drove screws through the pocket holes and into the side panels. A quick white bound with some clean rags and we were ready for the stone top. Sergey arrived right on time, and this was the first time I got to see the stone after it was fabricated. I really liked the rounded over edges and was happy to see that he was actually gluing it down, not just setting it on top of the plywood. The client was pleased with the table, and I was pleased with the commission. So let's head over to the studio, and I want to break down how I went about pricing this, how I positioned myself to get the commission, and go over the design process. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Stamps.com.
This video is sponsored by Stamps.com.
As someone that runs a small business, I know that there's nothing more valuable than my time. So I stopped wasting trips to the post office and started using Stamps.com. Stamps.com makes it easy to mail and ship right from your computer. You'll get exclusive discounts on postage and shipping from both the USPS and UPS. Since 1998, Stamps.com has been an indispensable tool for nearly 1 million businesses. Stamps.com brings the services of the U.S. Postal Service and UPS shipping right to your computer. Whether you're in an office sending invoices, have a side hustle on Etsy, or a full-blown warehouse shipping out orders, Stamps.com will make your life easier. All you need is a computer and a printer, no special supplies. It only takes minutes to get up and running printing official postage for any letter or package. Cut the confusion out of shipping with Stamps.com's new Rate Advisor tool. You can compare shipping rates and timelines to easily find the best option. Once your mail is ready, just schedule a pickup or drop it off. No traffic, no lines.
So stop wasting time going to the post office. Just go to Stamps.com/homemade-modern instead. There's no risk. Just go to Stamps.com/homemade-modern and let's check out this special offer. It includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. That's Stamps.com/homemade-modern. All right, back to the project.
So I don't do a lot of commission projects, but the last time I did, there was a lot of comments about pricing and how I went about sort of
getting the commission in the first place. So I thought we'd go over that a little bit here. The request came in from Instagram, and it wasn't from the client himself. It was from his head of human resources at their business. And so right away I knew I was dealing with an intermediary. Now, on one hand, that's challenging because it's a little bit of a game of telephone trying to figure out what the end client wants through the intermediary. But on the other hand, it's a good sign in the sense that if they're used to sort of commissioning or having people sort of do things for them, that means they might not have the time or be too much of a second guesser throughout the process, which can really slow down the design process when you have a client that has too much time on their hand and is sort of nitpicking at every little step. So when I get these kind of requests, my approach is interested but cautious. You can spend a lot of time on proposals and designs and never have a project actually come out of it. So I didn't want to immediately be too eager or, shoot over a whole bunch of design ideas and proposals. So the first thing I asked was, well, why me? There's so many more talented woodworkers and makers out there that do exactly this, that do custom commissions. And her response was like, well, I've seen you make a lot of different things, so I figured you could make just about anything, and therefore you'd have a lot of ideas for how to solve the solution that the client is looking for but can't necessarily fully describe. And so it was weird that the versatility, which, I have a little bit of that, but that also makes me far from an expert in any one type of crafting, was actually the draw there. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point on the marketing side, whereas that sometimes people are looking for the jack of all trades that can solve a solution that they're not really sure what that solution will be, more than looking for someone that has the 10,000 hours at one sort of skill set. Now, me personally, if I'm hiring someone to do it, I want the expert, but to each their own, and that's the beauty of a free market. So in the messages, I was careful not to promise anything on price or timing because I didn't really know what I was getting into yet. So we set up a phone call, and in that first call, here is what I was trying to figure out. I wanted to identify the unknowns, and the biggest one of that was the priorities. Everyone says they want everything, it should be beautifully designed and built with amazing exotic materials, and also be a trophy of craftsmanship. In that, if you just list out all these attributes, people will say that they want all of them. So what I try to do in these calls is to try to figure out what is the actual priority. Is the material choice the most important? Is time more important? Meaning that if there's a particular type of stone that he wants, or a subspecies of travertine, and that has a 4-week lead time versus a 1-week lead time, is he willing to wait for the exact thing that he wants? Because that helps me sort of project plan a lot better. So it became clear in this first phone call that the priority was actually time. They moved into this new office, and he just wanted to have a table in there and wasn't really seeing options that he felt were suitable for his needs. The second priority was just the material combination. He wasn't sure what kind of wood, but he knew that he wanted travertine, and he thought any sort of wood would do, and was going to kind of leave it to me to make some suggestions. There wasn't a lot of words used describing the style or shape or anything describing the geometry of the intended table. And they kept saying that it would be, a simple table just made out of really nice materials would do it for them. So that gave me just enough clarity where I could start getting cost estimates on the stone, and the wood I kind of know off the top of my head, so that wasn't too difficult. So at this point, I was careful to only give a really broad price range. Now, from the client perspective, they're trying to get a ballpark estimate. And I try to get this all the times when I'm doing architecture projects with plumbers, electricians, framers, and the like. Now, a lot of times people will just say, well, it depends on what you want. But if you haven't had the design document in between you yet, it's hard to articulate exactly what you want in a meaningful and objective manner. So I know that I need to give them some ballpark range, but I don't want to box myself into a corner price-wise and then realize later, no, they actually wanted things that were a lot more expensive. I also hadn't done the cost research yet on stone and stone fabrication.
So I'm kind of flying blind here, and they're trying to push me to get just a ballpark range of price. So what I did is saying like, look, I'm going to charge you this much for materials, and I'm going to charge you, this is my day rate for labor. If they pick cheaper materials, the price will come down. If they pick more expensive materials, it'll go up. If the design is simple, it'll be less labor. If the design is complex, it'll be more labor. And so I sort of adopt basically a cost plus system where I establish my rate. I don't take any margin on the materials. And that, when I sort of present that way of working, it normally gives them a little more comfort, meaning that as they give design feedback, they know the price could go up and down depending on complexity and material choices. So after that call, I made a few calls to Stoneland USA, which I had known from, or I got recommendations for them before from some interior design friends. And I just called them being like, hey, I need a table approximately this big. What kind of slabs of travertine do you have, and what is the price range? And so right away with that just one call that took about 15 minutes, I knew that I was going to be somewhere in between like $800 and $1,500 for the material itself. From there, I asked them, hey, do you do fabrication? I mean, I've cut stone before, but I don't have a perfect setup for it. And they said they don't do fabrication, but they referred me to Sergey, who does these kind of freelance one-off projects. I called Sergey. I told him the size of the table, and he immediately says, this much, as long as, and I asked him how long, he's like, as long as it takes. So that was kind of tricky. So I was getting good information on price, but I wasn't able to give them a timeline yet, and I already knew that time was one of their most important factors. So I kind of asked Sergey, if we pay you extra, can you do it faster? And I love this answer. He's like, no, it takes what it takes. And so a little more cajoling and conversation on the more sort of friendly basis, and eventually said, it'll take about 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, now I have a timeline for the one thing I can't control, which is the stone fabrication. I have a rough parameter for the price of the stone and the fabrication, and I'm getting a sense that the base can be relatively simple, and whatever base I was going to do is not going to take 2 weeks of my time. So I then quoted them 3 weeks for the completion, just in case something goes wrong, Sergey gets COVID, something like that. I don't want pressure on them because I quote exactly the time window that the fabricator gave me. And then I knew once I sort of ordered the stone and Sergey got started, I have sort of, this 2 week window to get the materials and build the base. The other important research part was figuring out where exactly it was going to be delivered to. I need to make sure, if this is a big stone table, I need to know, does this have to go into the building in pieces and up an elevator or around the staircase? If you ever helped friends move a sofa up a walk-up apartment, it's not fun. So I went to the office and I took a tour from the parking garage all the way up through the freight elevator and saw that we definitely would have a hard time getting the table all in one piece up there, but it wasn't going to be too difficult to move the top up and the base up in pieces. So it also was the freight elevator was a limiting size consideration for the tabletop itself. Originally, they wanted a tabletop that was about 2 feet longer, and I sort of talked them down saying, look, I don't think that would fit comfortably in your freight elevator and would present some logistical nightmares. So at this point, I sent over what I guess would be the first proposal. And I was made very clear to indicate that these are not designs. These are design directions. And they also asked for a portfolio of my work. So the head of HR wanted to show the client some previous examples. And I actually like this process because it lets me pick the type of work that I think best represents me. And hopefully that portfolio will lead the client to design choices that are also things that I really like aesthetically or conceptually. So I put together a very brief portfolio. I tried to shape it into the directions of projects that I would like to explore. If there's alignment, great. But if there isn't, I'll still do what the client wants. And then just a few real rough sketches of some different design directions. And again, this is the part that I think is really important, is I don't want to frame these as schematic or initial designs. I want to frame them as creative directions, and I explicitly say,
not designs. Now, the reason why I do this is I don't put a lot of time into these because I'm not under any sort of contract, and one, it's protecting my time as an investment. I don't want to sort of give away too much work for free. But I do want to establish a range of different ideas and directions that we could take these in and try to push them towards something that is also in my sort of curiosity zone. Presenting drawings that you haven't put a lot of time in for good reasons because you're not under contract is challenging. And this is why I think calling them directions is so important, is that they may not know the difference between a initial sketch that you've worked on for 1 hour versus a detailed drawing set that you worked on for 2 to 3 days. So they might interpret the lack of time as a indicator of your abilities as a designer. So until there's actually sort of payment established, I try to make it clear that you're not actually getting design. You're just getting ideas for directions. So he picked a direction. He picked a direction that I was actually least interested in, but at the same time would be the easiest one to sort of build. And then from there, I did a follow-up proposal where I did 4 different schematic sketches of that direction. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to draw these 4 different versions, and I just set the timer on my phone so that I don't go over that. Again, just to try to protect myself from getting too excited about it and spending a lot of time for something that's not established. At this point, I felt comfortable quoting a firm price. I knew the price of the stone. I knew the cost of fabrication. I knew the sort of basic design direction. And I knew that all of these different options within this second proposal would take me about an equal amount of time. Some a little bit more, but the ones that would take a little bit more were also ones that I liked a little bit more. So I felt very comfortable quoting the price at this point. Now, in terms of how I calculate price, I'm not a material wholesaler. My business isn't buying materials at one price and selling them at a higher price. I don't have a wholesaler's license. I can get some deals here and there on things, but it's not really the business I'm interested in doing. I'm in the business of translating my time as a designer and builder into profit. So I start with sort of knowing, okay, these are my cost of materials. And then from there, I know what my day rate is. My day rate for projects like this that I'm interested in, can learn something from in the case of working with stone in a way that I haven't worked with it before. But I know that I want $1,000 a day for that. I sort of roughly calculated how long it would take me and then always add in a little bit of a buffer. I knew that picking out the stone and buying the wood would take about half a day. Not the worst kind of work day, but still takes time to drive over to the place and then go pick it up and then schlep it into the shop. And then I knew that fabrication would take about 2.5 days. Delivery is another consideration. As much as you think, oh, it's the drive time, you set it up and you're done, the preparation, the packing, the ratchet straps, the moving blankets, all those like little last things before you deliver a finished product are kind of stressful and take a little bit longer than you might estimate. So I also factored in a full day for delivery, which brought me to 4 days total. That was, at $1,000 a day is, right around $8,000, but I decided to add in an extra half day because sometimes things go wrong. What if Sergey at the last minute couldn't make that day and I'd already scheduled the delivery for that day and had to switch it? I would lose some time in that last minute shift. So I always mostly target around my day rate, but then I add a little bit of a buffer just because, hey, sometimes things are weird. So let's compare this table to the last commission table I did that certainly upset a few people. Now, the day rate was relatively the same. I think it was a little bit different for that one because of other circumstances. I was more busy, so I was, probably charging a little bit more. But the concept was exactly the same the way I always think about things. That project, the client didn't really have a interest in expensive materials. They wanted a interesting and novel design and a really big table that fit their space perfectly. So the concept of the pricing was the same. I don't care what materials they choose. I've had great meals with expensive ingredients, and I've had great meals with inexpensive ingredients. So it was funny to me, though, that I think it was because of the sticker price being at sort of $6,000, and then seeing materials that a lot of people in the DIY space know are not expensive materials, plywood and steel rod. But that base was so much more intricate. It was a more original design. It involved a lot more problem solving. So it was a lot more effort on the labor and figuring out side of things for me. And like I said before, I'm in the business of pricing my time, not other people's materials. This table had a way higher price tag for materials, but I mean, that base is really simple. And the thickness of the walnut, which again drove up the price, is really doing a lot of the work. It's giving the sense of sort of a substantial base, but that's as basic woodworking as it gets using expensive hardwood. And I know I'm going to get some flack for pocket holes and jigsawing an expensive wood like walnut. After the table was delivered, I was sort of talking to some of the people in the office and asking them, well, again, I was still sort of a little bit curious on why they went custom for a table like this. I mean, the table I made it's nice, but it's not super remarkable. And there's got to be ones available that are from, furniture companies that are similar. And they showed me the one that he was sort of looking at before they reached out to me. And I think it was about $13,000. It was about the same size. It was the same combination of materials. And I was like, well, why didn't you just buy that one? I mean, you don't really seem like people that are trying to save money on this. And they were like, well, there's an 18-week lead time. And I was like, oh, yeah, I get that. So that's really why they turned to a custom commission. They were expecting to pay more. And so you might suggest that on the previous table, the plywood one, that I charged too much. You might suggest for this one that I undercharged. I have no problem with the price that I sold it to them. The concept still applies. I'm not trying to milk the value out of these things. I don't want to try to play deal or no deal and guess what they're thinking and then get just the price just under it so I get the commission and maximize the profit for it. I'm doing just fine. There'll be, I also get to monetize, which I'm very privileged to do on top of the content. So that kind of helps out. But no, my thought process is the same for all these things. I want to be able to know in my head my schedule for each project and my ROI for each project. And when I keep it really simple, it's great when it works out in my favor. And the likelihood of it not is relatively low when I kind of price at that day rate. I like not having to sort of calculate hours because switching costs are a thing that are really hard to figure out sometimes. So I just like to chunk it out being, I'm going to spend 2.5 days sort of building this. Great. I know if I build it in 2.5 days, I'll make my rate. And I know if it takes an extra half a day, not the end of the world. It just lets me sort of keep it all in my head without sort of resorting to spreadsheets and all these sort of efficiency protocols. So I definitely probably could have squeezed out a few more $1,000, but that's okay. Like, I got my rate and I learned how to work with stone. And so I think that that's like the easiest way to do something for the long haul is you kind of establish what it's worth to you, what your time is worth. Now, I'm in a very lucky position where custom commissions are a very small percent of my business operations. And so I don't have to take bad projects just to maintain overhead. And I don't have much overhead. I don't have a big workshop that I pay rent for. I don't have a big team of fabricators that I have to sort of pay salaries for. I don't even have expensive tools. I'm using kind of DIY level tools and then a really nice SawStop table saw. So because my overhead is low, all I really have to do is protect my time. Now, I don't think that this is a particularly great way to price things or the best way or the smartest business strategy for all you other sort of makers that are in business as makers. But I've tried a lot of different things, and what I found is that I had to find a system that kind of allows me to operate without stress. And when I'm operating without stress, it allows me to operate with creativity. And when I operate with creativity, I have a lot of fun and I stay really invested and motivated in my work. So my only sort of takeaway isn't like copy this business model and this pricing structure. It's just try to be honest about what you're interested in, how you think about yourself and your work, and price it in a way
that makes the work fun and enjoyable and reduces the amount of anxiety and stress that you have about those projects. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Bye.